Art Against Mental Illness.
There is a pattern of behaviour on this podcast, should you see fit to go back and look, that when I struggle to produce something that I deem of value, I resort to talking about that reality. The episode before this one is exactly an example of this. I try to make sure that such episodes are not filler, that they say something of value, and since my whole shtick on here is the process is everything, talking about my process as an illustration of this seems perfectly valid. As a subject, I deem it of value. We're all in this together, after all. But I can't do that all the time. Although I don't consider this podcast an ego trip, I do talk about me, my brain, and my life quite a lot. I'm autistic, it's what we do. But I can imagine that would get quite boring and seem very much like an ego trip. So I try not to. But what happens when that's all I can think to do? What do I do then? Rewind to the episode previous to this where I bang on about not being able to produce any content for this podcast, but then do anyway. This episode is essentially a more grown up and considered sequel to that. Because, dear listeners, you deserve better. Just to recap, in the last episode I talked about needing to feel a subject or theme to be able to do a half decent job of tackling it. I said that I don't lack ideas, just the ability to execute. In fact, several other ideas have emerged since I recorded that episode, yet here I am, not talking about any of them. Why? You, that's why. No, don't look innocently around you like I must be talking to someone else in the room. You know full well I'm not, since you're sitting on the bog, aren't you, you dirty bastard? No, I'm most definitely talking to you. Why, pray tell, you exclaim, am I blaming you for my lack of ability to craft new episodes of this podcast? Isn't it obvious? It's all about the pressure you load upon me, day in, day out. I simply can't perform under all this pressure. All the expectation, impatience, yearning, demanding. How am I supposed to create under these conditions? Woe is me. Okay, so I'm exaggerating a bit. I'm not exactly getting heckled in the street or on social media or anywhere, in fact. There is literally no one badgering and hectoring me impatiently and berating my lazy complacence. No one, that is, other than me. I am not happy at all, and I take no prisoners. Performance pressure is a bitch, and none more so when it comes from yourself, which of course it always does. So, how is this pernicious affliction manifesting for me? Well, some of it was documented in the last episode, but to recap, here's some of the symptoms afflicting me. Inability to start producing an episode once I commit to doing it. Being overly critical about my work once I do start and not finishing it. Constantly discounting, dismissing or belittling perfectly decent ideas. Being overly critical about past episodes. Assuming that everyone thinks I'm a fraud and convincing myself not to bother. Going round in circles with the same thoughts and ideas, constantly discounting each, getting nowhere. It's annoying. A friend of mine once described this state of mind as spaghetti bees, which I always thought was very appropriate. All my thoughts tied in knots, but I can't ignore them because they're making a horrible buzzing sound and circling my head. Every day that goes by without output just gets worse. I've got a long history of giving up. This is not a bad thing per se, sometimes you just gotta move on. Not following through is arguably the most common ADHD trait. But I like doing this, I want to continue. However, my brain keeps telling me that maybe I should just give up. Or worse, it says if I don't produce something soon, I'll just forget all about it and I'll have given up anyway and everyone will hate me and I'll be heckled in the streets and the world will end. My brain is an arsehole like that. This is all exacerbated by the reality that to keep this thing going, to keep listeners interested, and to stand a chance of gaining new ones, I need to be consistent or at least vaguely regular. We live in an attention economy, and if I don't keep yours, it'll wander off to something far less charming and erudite, and we can't have that now, can we? I'm aware that I'm treading familiar ground here that I already trod very recently, and not very constructively, so I'm going to try and be a bit more constructive this time, and or maybe at least a bit educational. If I can't break my own fugue, maybe I can help you should this happen or be happening to you. Let's see how we get on, shall we? So, performance pressure has both a physiological and a psychological basis. There's this thing called the Yerkes-Dodson law. If you plot stimulation, aka stress, on the x-axis of a chart and performance on the y-axis, you see an inverted U-shape. Google it. Basically, pressure increases performance, but only up to a peak optimal point. After that, the process is reversed. More pressure, worse performance. A bit of pressure? Awesome. It sharpens you up, gets you in the zone. This is where flow states happen. It's a healthy state that many creatives crave. But once the pressure or stress levels tip over that happy zone, things get dysfunctional pretty quickly and the opposite effect is achieved. Performance goes down and only decreases when further pressure is applied. As performance decline, our efforts achieve less and we incur recriminations from ourselves or from others, which ratchets up the pressure even further and thus the spiral of doom continues. When this happens, your nervous system goes into fight or flight mode, which is exactly what should happen in stressful situations. But that particular biological machinery was evolved at a time where stress often came via large carnivorous cats attempting to detach your limbs for their lunch. It's a little overkill for the purposes of getting a podcast out. At this point, your ability to pay attention to the requisite task goes out the window, since your brain is scanning for threats rather than writing a nice soothing think piece on the transformational powers of creativity. But where is the threat? Since there are no giant carnivorous felines in my immediate vicinity, my brain looks for threats closest to home. Suddenly, the intensity of every error, failure and obstacle is turned up to number 11, which in turn exacerbates the problem. Everything gets bent all out of proportion and I start to freak out. Or more likely, I think, sod this for a laugh, I'm going to do something else for a while. So in the fight or flight stakes, I choose flight. But the reality is I shouldn't be doing either. The whole thing, to an extent at least, is imagined. But as far as my nervous system is concerned, it's all very real. So it's not all in my head then. Oh wait, so it is all in my head, mostly at least, but that doesn't mean to say it's not real. I'm also not alone. There's a long and pervasive lineage of performance pressure and the resulting horror show in the arts. Take Sylvia Plath, for example. She was obsessed with being the perfect poet, wife, mother, and academic. Her journals are brutal self-flagellation, constant monitoring of her own output and worth. She set impossible standards, then spiralled when she couldn't meet them. Granddaddy of paranoid literature, Franz Kafka, never published most of his work. He instructed his mate, Max Brod, to burn everything after his death, who obviously failed to comply. The pressure wasn't commercial or reputational. He set himself an impossibly high bar and was plagued with self-doubt in every aspect of his life. Many of his most influential works were unfinished at the time of his death because he considered them unworthy. Various of these are now considered among history's most important works of literature. Primary creative force of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, tied himself in perfectionist knots over their now era-defining masterpiece Pet Sounds and its infamous follow-up Smile. After being hailed as a genius for the former, he became obsessively nitpicky over the latter, eventually shelving the ambitious and intended pièce de résistance after several years of tinkering in 1967. The album was finally released in a form that Wilson could live with in 2004. A similar story applies to Chinese Democracy, Guns N' Roses' follow-up to their legendary late 80s and early 90s output, which took 17 years to be finished and released thanks to Axl Rose's uncompromising quality control. Obsessive painter of moody squares, Mark Rothko, became so consumed with whether his paintings achieved transcendence that he'd destroy canvases, refuse to sell work and obsess over lighting and context. Some big names there, but I think that any creator that has any pride in their work suffers from this once in a while, and maybe regularly. Viewing your own creative output critically is literally the only way to progress and improve. If you don't take pride in your work, then why bother at all? It's not exactly easy to make money in this game, so most of us do it for the love of doing it. And if you love doing it, by definition, you love doing it well. Whatever your version of well is, in any case. We all want to be better, so we create the conditions that will motivate us to do so. Maybe that's as simple as setting a high bar for yourself and sticking to it. Maybe you've got an exhibition or a show that you really want to shine for. Maybe you've entered a competition. Maybe you just rock the shit out of whatever you do and simply wish to continue at the same standard. This invariably means you can't phone it in. You gotta turn up. Yes, the odd turkey will be tolerated, if not by you, then by your admirers. We can't be on our A game all the time. I don't think people think less of a creator for not always hitting the mark. What really shows, however, and what folks really don't like, is when it looks like you didn't even try. Aim high and miss? All good. Fart out some drivel because you couldn't be asked, and you will be punished. I can name a bunch of moonshots that fell from reputable artists that continue to be reputable despite such missteps. David Lynch's Dune adaptation, Metallica's disastrous Lou Reed collaboration Lulu, the final season of Game of Thrones. Getting shit wrong is unpleasant for sure, but it's part of the process. Yes, we should all avoid doing it, that's what quality control is about, but we can't let it paralyse us. If we constantly fear mistakes, how will we ever take risks? If we don't take risks, how will we progress? But it's worse than this, at least as far as the core thesis of this podcast is concerned. Because if you've tied yourself in knots worrying about whether you can cut the proverbial mustard, you're not basking in the soothing bath salts of creativity, more likely arriving on the bed of nails of self-recrimination. Double bummer. Performance pressure, as well as its duvet-hogging bedfellows, creative block, procrastination and overthinking, are anxiety responses, but also traps that we set ourselves. They are a result of an imbalance in our critical thinking, and a response, more often than not, to phantom malefactors, to non-existent demons. But is there more going on here than just fear of failure? After all, I don't have to do this. I could put it all to bed for another day in hopes that some more momentum appears from somewhere. But I've been doing that for a week now, and here I am, again, struggling to conceive of the next paragraph, glancing frequently and forlornly at my pitiful word count, and feeling my despondence rise. I sort of don't care at this point if I produce my next masterwork. If I can produce something half decent, it will suffice. But I'm even struggling with that. I feel like my pipes are blocked. Creative constipation, if you will. It's not due to lack of matter in my pipes, it's just my ability to eject that matter. Yuck. Let's observe more closely what's going on to see if we can get to the bottom of it. Here's what's bothering me right now. 1. I'm concerned that I don't have a point to this piece, and therefore how will I finish it, let alone impart some wisdom or at least be entertaining. 2. The sun is shining on my screen, making it hard to read what I'm writing, while also making me think I should be outside enjoying the start of spring rather than sitting here getting demoralised. 3. I'm worried about becoming increasingly demoralised and concerned that if I stop I'll never start again. 4. I'm worried that I'm repeating myself, both within this episode and in general, that I'm just recycling old themes and I have nothing new to say, that I'm boring, that I have peaked. 5. I'm nervous that I'm talking about me again and no one needs to hear more of that. 6. My brain and belly are telling me that I need a snack even though I only ate breakfast an hour ago. 7. My butt is itchy. 8. I'm worried that some paying work that I've been promised will not come to fruition. 9. I've got an art workshop this evening that I need to prepare for. When will I do that? Should I be doing it now? 10. I'm worried that no one is listening to my inane drivel anyway, so why am I even bothering? 11. My phone is hovering malevolently at my side, calling to me with its vibrations, tempting me to immerse myself in the cosy world of doom scrolling, compelling me to take a peek at what fresh horrors have emerged since I last checked 10 minutes ago. 12. Blah blah blah, etc. etc. Observe some of the words I used there. I'm worried, concerned, nervous. Most of it has nothing to do with the actual matter in hand. It's just a subset of my ambient anxieties and routine foibles. I can largely discount each of these. Let's give it a go. Here are my answers to my anxious self, point by point. 1. This article has no point. Well, clearly it does. If nothing else, it's helping me crunch through my mental fugue state. But I also think it's highlighting how this stuff happens, what the experience of performance pressure and creative block is like. 2. The sun is shining on my screen and I want to go outside. So I can easily shift my position so I'm not directly in the sun, I'm just being lazy. I will also definitely go for a walk later today and therefore will experience the delights of spring that are tempting me. 3. Becoming more demoralised and fear of quitting. I'm still writing, aren't I? I'm always writing. I've been doing this podcast for nearly 2 years now. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it just pours out almost involuntarily. We all get blocked up from time to time, and as we saw above, I'm in good company. 4. I'm worried about repeating myself. Well, it's said that a message needs repeating at least 7 times before most people take it on board. Barriers to getting started are one of the biggest obstacles to using the therapeutic value of creativity, therefore it's a subject really worth focusing on, and repeatedly. 5. I'm talking about myself again. So, as I've said before, relating my own experiences is just how I communicate and empathise with others. What better way to illustrate the problem of creative block than illustrating my own struggles with it in real time? 6. I need a snack. Well, it's getting on for lunchtime, Alex, so what do you expect? You can just wait an hour and really relish whatever junk you find in the fridge. 7. Itchy butt. Alex, scratch your butt, you idiot. 8. That paying work not emerging. Yes, this is a possibility, but you don't actually know that anything has changed in that situation. It's just taking a bit longer than you were expecting. You've already resolved that you will chase this later in the week, so stop fretting about it and get on with the matter in hand. 9. I've got an art workshop to prepare for. Yes, mate, in about 6 hours' time. Stick that problem back in a box for now, you doofus. 10. No one is listening to this podcast. You know that people are listening to this and that your listener count is steadily climbing. Stop being such a pessimist. Also, you keep saying on this actual podcast that you'd keep doing it even if no one was listening. So shut your damn trap. 11. My malevolent phone is hovering malevolently. Well, it's not though, is it? Yes, it's tempting to go check who bombed who in the last 10 minutes, but you can't very well do a whole lot about it, and you know it makes you stressed. Besides, you didn't pick up your phone, did you? You're still typing. Save the doom scrolling to spoil your sandwich with. 12. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's all it is. Blah. Most of these are valid concerns to one degree or another, but not one of them is creating a serious barrier or is in urgent need of attention right now, and therefore they are mostly just noise. And not new noise either, just the usual generic background chatter. Move on. Well, that was cathartic. I do feel a bit better, and more importantly, I'm still typing. I still don't know where I'm going with this though. Or maybe I do. Creativity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Our creative outputs, as detached as they might be from our daily existence, all contain a piece of us, and specifically the us that exists right now. That background chatter, the anxiety, the self-recrimination, the self-doubt is there in the background for everything we do. It's like a semi-tuned FM radio in your car. Sometimes the noise is mostly exactly that, noise, featureless static, but on and off some signal breaks through, demanding your attention while still being mostly amorphous and unidentifiable. Ghosts of information seep through, not clearly enough to amount to anything, but just lucid enough to tug at our attention, engaging our curiosity, sap our concentration. We know it's just noise that we should metaphorically try and tune out, but for many of us, the radio is stuck on and the tuning knob is jammed. This is the background frequency of our lives, a manifestation of complexity, chaos, and a crazy world. Always there, sometimes more insistent and discordant, sometimes louder, sometimes barely audible. But it's always at its loudest when we're struggling or stuck or lacking in self-confidence. And when you think about it, we only experience performance pressure when we're not performing well, or at least when we perceive that we're not performing well. When we're in the troughs to our creative peaks, since, while we're surfing the creative wave, we're too preoccupied to pay any heed to that crashing ocean of noise. And why do those troughs exist? They exist because the waves do. Progress isn't linear, it's spiky. Even if everything is getting better, or worse for that matter, consistently, there are still highs and lows within that journey. Every sane person knows we can't be on a high all the time. Waves are fleeting and ephemeral, and in any case we need a rest. And without the more mundane bits, the troughs, we wouldn't and couldn't appreciate the highs anyway. So then, when do performance pressure, overthinking and creative block occur? They do so in these natural transitions, the calmer moments between the surging waves. The troughs do not occur because of those psychological impediments. It's just that in the calmer, less frenetic moments, we can suddenly hear the noise of life's oceanic undulation again, and we get a bit twitchy. This in turn keeps us from getting back upon the surfboard to catch the next swell. But is that such a bad thing? The surfer needs to rest. The sprinter needs to recuperate. When I reflect on my current state and think about how I got here, I don't see any specific circumstances or events that led me here. I know those blockers above are just noise. I can't justify my predicament, if I can even call it that. In some ways that fuels my anxiety response, like there's some invisible antagonistic force seeking to thwart me, a cosmic psychic friction, a malicious imp. But my cooler intellectual brain can see it for what it is, just a natural and perhaps necessary pause, a point of inflection, just part of the course of things. Now, I know that sometimes these background problems are not just noise, and I'm certainly not trying to minimise anyone's struggle or misfortune, but my basic assumption is that if something is significant enough to truly suck the air out of your creative balloon, then that may well be something that you should be paying attention to. I'm also assuming that if you're doing so, my message here isn't really for you. No, my message is for those of us that, despite or indeed because of our complex and sometimes distressing lives, immerse ourselves in the creative comfort zone, and for whom, for one reason or another, that zone is failing to provide comfort right now. My message is, hang in there. This is just a natural pause, not a hard stop. Believe in yourself and your ability. Know that the love of the art form and the peace that it provides will return. Look back in time and you'll see that it always does. I believe my mojo will return. Maybe it already has.
Art against mental illness.